Has this funny bald guy from the Renaissance of periodization and one of the brightest minds in the fitness world on YouTube finally completely lost his mind? It all started with his recent skin removal surgery, his thoughts on more liposuction, his glorification of artificial intelligence, and the supposed next generation of steroids. In March, Dr. Mike performed skin removal surgery, the primary goal of which was to get rid of chronic fat folds and stubborn fat cells from this area, primarily for aesthetic reasons. Mike is already so attractive that his only real downside was loose skin hanging from his lower back. But in reality, the reason was that Mike claimed he couldn't sculpt in this area, which cost him his bodybuilding success and potentially his pro card. That's a lot of extra fat cells accumulating on tons of extra skin. Mike is very open about his body image, and I respect him for that. He doesn't mince words, doesn't censor anything, and tells you exactly how and what it is. Personally, I'm against any surgery done purely for aesthetic reasons and believe it reflects an unhealthy body image, but it's not my place to tell others what to do with their bodies. He now explains that the reason for the skin removal surgery was due to Mike's past poor decisions, such as gaining too much muscle or misguided thinking about gaining muscle. He had such a large fat buildup that, largely due to genetics, a significant portion of his fat was stored in his sides and lower back. This caused him to have more fat cells and looser skin on his lower back and hips. And no matter how much weight he lost, he couldn't get rid of them, and he claimed to have stored a lot of water weight there, which drew heavy criticism from the bodybuilding community, as he likely just wasn't lean enough to compete. He even made an entire video about his recovery, and to put it mildly, it wasn't pretty. A few people have made videos about it, but it seems rather ambiguous, as many of these same guys actually forced him to undergo surgery to fix the problem. And then, after he gave in, they accused him of body dysmorphia or bad advice. Still, I don't think skin removal surgery in bodybuilding is a wise move. But then again, if you want to be competitive in the sport, you have to do things that negatively impact your physical and mental health, so I don't see how this is any different from dieting just to prepare for a competition, even if it's a bit more absurd and far more invasive. Let's look at a more recent controversy. A video about the next generation of steroids, supposedly without side effects. Dr. Mike mentioned a recent study on monkeys given 2 drugs that inhibit the secretion of the hormones myostatin and activin A. Both of these drugs cause a reduction in muscle tissue that could otherwise be built in a negative way. The monkeys were divided into 4 groups, and the group given both drugs, trevogrumab and garetosmab, along with the well-known semaglutide found in Ozempic, not only lost the most fat of the 4 groups but also built a significant amount of muscle mass, while all the other groups actually lost muscle mass. And remember, monkeys don't lift weights, but when we do, it's usually under similar conditions. So they built muscle mass simply by living and taking these drugs. Mike said that these drugs likely won't have any side effects, and that human trials are currently underway to evaluate their effectiveness. I think this is great because these drugs could be given to elderly people who lack any physical fitness, cancer patients, or other hospitalized patients who, for whatever reason, are rapidly losing muscle mass. But for those of you familiar with biochemistry and the like, this sounds like a story too good to be true. First, these drugs are monoclonal antibodies, meaning they likely need to be injected and won't be available in pill form. Second, these drugs can also increase cardiac hypertrophy, meaning the heart muscle becomes thicker, which can actually reduce its ability to pump blood, as seen in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Third, they won't necessarily be free of side effects, especially long-term ones, as with steroids. Cardiac hypertrophy is hypertrophy, but there's also a higher risk of injury to passive tissues like ligaments and tendons, which are also very common among steroid users. It's a bit wishful thinking, yes, but apparently 77% of the people in these human trials experienced adverse side effects after taking all 3 drugs, with 1 in 10 experiencing so-called serious side effects, and 28% of all participants dropping out, which sounds pretty scary. These drugs likely aren't approved for use yet, but it's still cool to think we could create drugs that cause muscle gain without having to do anything and lose fat in the process. These are 2 of the biggest health problems in the world right now, facing all age groups. However, I have to say that I'm generally against taking medication for anything. Unless, as I said, it's absolutely necessary, and I definitely wouldn't want such drugs available on the open market, as Dr. Mike suggests. But then again, they could be very effective for specific patient cases or for older people who could live another 10 to 15 years but have the physical endurance of a stone. They definitely shouldn't be used as anabolic steroids, even if the short-term side effects aren't that bad. We don't know the long-term effects, even though that's why we're conducting these human studies. I simply don't think that marketing drugs that can help with faster muscle growth than anabolic steroids would improve society overall, and it certainly won't solve any of the current problems in the fitness and bodybuilding industry, though it could worsen them. Mike has also been very open about other drugs like 677 Malawian kwaches. He recorded a video explaining why nicotine is beneficial for weight loss and destroyed functional models, a cult built on pseudoscience. But the reason people think Dr. Mike has lost his mind is because he's a weird guy. Mike says almost everything he thinks, or at least thinks he does, and that could be to get your attention, or it could simply be that he prefers to communicate that way. In the fitness industry, people love to nitpick, especially if you're a supposed expert like Mike, even though he's not always right about training, nutrition, performance-enhancing drugs, or even bodybuilding. He's even said he's terrible at bodybuilding, and his friend Jared said he's untrainable. Regardless, Mike has gained a ton of attention for these bad decisions, and people love to dramatize it for ratings because he has such a large channel and is such a weird guy that countless things he says can be taken out of context to make him seem even weirder. And sometimes just knowing the context makes things worse. When it comes to his own body, he makes questionable decisions. He's just a professor who creates educational content on YouTube, who sometimes says things that are wrong or controversial, and sometimes things that are just plain weird. And many guys prefer to stick to that more than they have lately. While Mike knows he'll be criticized for saying many of these things that many, including myself, don't necessarily agree with, most of what he says is valuable. And the guy definitely knows more about physiology than most people on fitness YouTube, and probably more than I do, although I don't think all of his practical approaches to training and nutrition are always the best. Still, I think much of his bodybuilding pursuits have clouded his judgment in many areas, particularly in how he views drugs and medical supplies as tools for building muscle or getting muscular, or how willing he is to undergo invasive surgery to potentially become a better bodybuilder despite not having the genetic predisposition. He also talks about religion and other such things, but that's not my area of expertise. Mike also discusses politics, technology, human nature, and the like. My philosophy is to stick to what you know and not have an opinion on everything, or at least keep it to yourself. He's very open about the impact of certain anabolic steroids on his physical and mental health and what it takes to pursue a career as a professional bodybuilder. Many hope he won't return to the pro ranks again, although that seems likely given the current situation. Ultimately, we respect Dr. Mike for his transparency and positive contributions, but we also encourage questioning what we hear from influencers, especially when the lines between science, education, personal obsession, and entertainment become somewhat blurred.